So I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, David Mackenzie, who is a wildlife photographer. He's also a couple of other things. He's going to talk about wildlife photography and its role in conservation, but he's also a North American bear lover. So he is a bear lover and has spent a lot of time in Canada, where you guys are, Irene and Taylor. And in that sense, he's a visual storyteller, and those visual storytelling methods are a way of connecting people to nature and conservation. So I would like to pass over now to David. We're really looking forward to hearing more about what you've got to offer, David. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just attempt to share my screen. There we go. Is everyone able to see that okay?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. Well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to talk about conservation photography and wildlife photography, and I think I'll be talking about photography as they lower me into a box somewhere. It's a passion that I've had for a very long time. My photographic journey started when I was about 7 years old, where my sister gave me a camera that she'd been using, and she was a bit older than me, but she handed me this camera, and it was a thing called a box brownie, which is a little box about that big, and I've still got it. But that's where my photographic journey began, and I grew up in the bush in New South Wales on a sheep and cattle station, and I used to run around the garden when I was a little fella, and then get a little bit more adventurous as I grew up taking photographs, and my journey through various different camera options continues to this day. But about 20 years ago, I had an occasion to be in Breckenridge in Colorado, skiing with my son, and it was a horrible windy day and the lifts were all closed. So I went for a walk down the street in Breckenridge, and I happened to wander into a photographic gallery run by a man called Thomas Mangelson. And I didn't really know very much about him as a person or his photographs until I saw one image that I recognized immediately. And when I describe it, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's an image of a bear on top of a waterfall in Alaska with its mouth open and a salmon in its mouth. No, few people know Mangelson by name, but they all know his image. And I was captivated by that. And that sent me on a course to really devote my photographic energies to wildlife, and by extension, photographing wildlife for conservation and telling stories about the conservation of wildlife. I had an opportunity some years later to travel back to the US to meet Tom Mangelson at a photographic workshop in Denver, Colorado. And that's where a couple of very significant things happened during that occasion. I had the opportunity to meet Mangelson and several other really good photographers who have been and continue to be inspirations for me. And I also met Linda on that occasion too, back in 2013. We kind of pretty much became friends instantly. So it was a special time, and meeting someone like Tom Mangelson uh, was special, and it helped solidify what I wanted to do. And fast forward to now, I guess I've been focusing very much on taking photographs that tell stories ever since, including numerous trips back to North America, and also some of the work that I do here in Australia to tell stories, and koalas being an area of special interest for me and for Linda as well, with the work we do with Queensland Koala Crusaders. And I think it's really important to get people to engage in issues such as the need to conserve koalas through visual stories, because people fall in love with images. We've been we've been telling stories through images since humanity began. And you think about the rock art paintings and cave paintings and things all over the world, and stories are passed down from generation to generation through visual imaging. So in photographic terms, in terms of today, I guess I like I like to think about approaching photography for conservation with a purpose, and that means some pre-planning and thinking about what sort of images I want to capture and what sort of stories I want to tell with those images. Uh, we can tell a story with one image, or we can tell a story with a series of images, or we can tell a story with images and text, and have them published in magazines and so forth. So there's different mediums, and from a photography point of view, it's worth considering where you want to tell the story. And for most of us these days, it's social media. So it's a fantastic opportunity for us to just put a story out there for people to see. We can also, use traditional media and magazines and things as well. And when those sort of opportunities come along, it's great because it's a big circulation, and it's personally rewarding as well. I get the suggestion a lot that capturing good wildlife images is about being in the right place at the right time. And I kind of take a little bit different view to that, in that I think it's about knowing the right place and knowing the right time and being there. So when we're telling conservation stories, it's about doing our homework so we understand what sort of behaviors or what sort of situations we're trying to capture with our images and photographs. So planning and photographing with a purpose is, I think, one of the important ways in which we can harness our photography to tell good stories. So that leads me to the first slide, and it is not and never will be about the gear. Uh, I love new cameras. I love new photographic toys, and I love embracing the all of those things that come with a new gadget or a new camera. But it's never about the camera. This is just a few things I threw on the bed the other day that come out of my camera bag that in any particular time I might use to capture images with a raft of different lenses. There's an action camera there. There's a drone. There's my big camera with its 200 to 800 mil lens on it, which I've captured some nice shots with. Even those binoculars sitting there on the left are able to take photographs and video. So we have this vast array of tools at our disposal now to capture images. But some of the most important photos in history have not been taken by big, expensive equipment. And I probably take as many photos with this thing as with all of that other stuff put together. And it's really possible, especially with the technology that lives inside phones these days. It's really possible to take some great images with a simple tool that's in our pocket all of the time. So, you know, we it's easy to think, oh, I could take good photos like that if I had a better camera, or if I had a better lens, or if I had a good whatever. But really, the opportunity is there to just get whatever camera out and put yourself into a situation in front of a subject and press the button. And we can talk about shutter speeds and apertures and all that sort of technical stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about the image that you capture with what you've got at your disposal at the time. So I thought today what I'd do is share a few images that speak to me about a conservation message. And then I want to tell a special story at the end about a particular occasion that tells a story about a particular very special environment. This first image is obviously a coastal brown bear from British Columbia in Canada. The story behind this image is that we were on a small photographic expedition into a rainforest area along the coast, which is a marine environment with lots of glacial melt coming down. And where this photo was taken was fairly close to the interface between saltwater and freshwater. And we pulled up on this, we were in rubber inflatable boats. We pulled up onto this island to have some lunch, and we saw this bear on the other side of the estuary, just walking along rather curiously, looking at us. And then it decided to swim across onto our island. The island is probably about half the size of a football field. And it wandered up reasonably close and stood there for some minutes, maybe 5 minutes, just looking at us. There was a group of maybe 10 of us with a guide, and the guide just said, just stay close. It's going to be okay. Don't decide to wander off on your own for obvious reasons. And we did that. And before long, the bear just decided that we were no threat to it and it was no threat to us. So it sat down and started eating its lunch with us. And it was a very cool moment. But the story that this photograph conveys is that bears, we think bears are these big ferocious things that tear people to shreds and eat whatever flesh they can. But the reality is their diet is largely herbivorous. These on this particular time of the year, the salmon have not quite started to run in the coast of British Columbia, so their diet is primarily vegetation like their sedge grass and berries. And so in this one capture, it shows a softer side of a beautiful animal that's actually eating grass. And that's a major part of its diet at that time of the year. So one image can tell one short story about the behavior of a bear that perhaps people don't know so much about. This next image comes from the same trip, and it was captured beautifully by Linda. And it's of two bears, a male on the left and a female on the right, that we'd been observing for some time, probably half, three-quarters of an hour. They came down from the hills at the back onto this, basically the water's edge. You can see that it's tidal, rocks and kelp and seaweed and all sorts of things. And this was a mating pair of brown bears, and we'd watched them engage in mating behavior for probably 20 minutes. And there's a story in that. Yes, they were mating. It would have been easy to capture images. In fact, Linda and I both got images of them actually mating. But the real story here is the tenderness of their relationship when they finished mating. And that brief touch of nose was a very soft, tender moment between these two animals that we think of as ferocious predators. They touched their nose and then off they went their separate ways. And it was just a beautiful conclusion to an activity, a behavior that these two animals were carrying out totally in the wild. We were at a reasonably safe distance in an inflatable boat again, so we weren't necessarily intruding on their space, close enough to get nice images like that, but not too close to threaten or interfere with their behavior. And that's always important to us whenever we're in the field with nature, is to not put yourself in a position that interferes with the behavior of the animals that you're trying to capture. So a beautiful image captured by Linda, and it's actually framed on the wall in our living room. That one, it's very special to us. This next image is totally different again. It's from here in Queensland, and if I were to submit that image to a photographic competition, it wouldn't get past round one. If I were to submit it to be critiqued by photographic judges and others, they would tear it to shreds because there's a whole lot wrong as an image. But as a to tell a visual story, it's a different thing because it's about a flock of plum-headed finches, and I'd been watching those finches for about half an hour. And if you've ever spent time with small birds like that, they never stop. They're just going all over the place all of the time. I had maybe 2 seconds to grab that image when they all just landed on that piece of dead stick. It looks like it's a piece of dead castor oil plant or something. They all just landed on the stick, fired off a couple of images in that fractions of a second, and boom, they're gone. But it tells a story about the fact that these animals live in flocks like that. They're seed eaters, obviously, but you can see that vegetation on the right is lantana, which is an invasive pest species here that's taken over lots of areas of coastal Queensland, and it's a terrible thing. But here, these birds have made it part of their habitat. So it tells the story of the interaction between where these birds live and the vegetation around that they've adapted to. The water in the background in that shot's actually the Brisbane River, and it's about 2 hours northwest of Brisbane where I captured that image. I could have cropped out the lantana and would have made it probably a more correct photo from a composition standpoint, but I don't think it tells the story as effectively. So I chose, and I spent hours agonizing over it, but I chose to leave the lantana in there because I think that's part of the story. If I were to want to have that image as to submit for a competition or something else, then maybe might have made different choices. The other interesting thing about that image, as it is there, as you see it there, is that when I had my photographic gallery, it was one of my best-selling images. So even though, to my mind and to a critic's mind, it's not correct, it's still appealing because it's interesting. So that's why I selected that one to talk about as well. We have two really great conservation success stories in Queensland over the last probably generation, and one is the humpback whales and the resurgence of humpback whales in their vast numbers that are coming up and down the Queensland coast now, and I find them incredibly exciting to photograph, and it really showcases a success in conservation of an animal. And for our Canadian friends, I've got some great photos of humpbacks in British Columbia as well. The other one, of course, one of my favourite animals of all is our saltwater crocodile. And these things were persecuted and hunted and almost to the point of total destruction before the protections were put in place a number of years ago now, and they're coming back, and we're learning to live with saltwater crocodiles, as dangerous as they are. We're learning to live with them. And I noticed in the press this morning there's more controversy about relocating crocodiles for safety reasons and all of that. To me, the safety procedure is don't get in the water whether you know there's crocodiles. It's pretty simple. They were here first, but
David,
that's
if
just
you're
me. I
okay
love.
for a question from Jenny.
Yes.
Yeah, in the crocodile along its tail, it's missing one scoot. And it seems to me, can you see there's a gap there in the scoot?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
I I I believe, and I don't know the direct answer to your question, except that this crocodile's on the Daintree River in North Queensland, and crocodiles are studied by researchers from university and others, and sometimes they take samples. Crocodiles also.
I have worked with the freshwater crocodile research in Queensland, and one of the things we did was to cut out from younger ones, one scoot in along the tail, and then others along the two spines, and they were a number. It was a numbering system.
Yeah,
But I
look,
can't see if there are
it's
any
highly
other
likely that
gaps
that's what
along
happened. Yeah,
there.
it's likely that that's what happened. I don't know. Crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, as you probably know, they fight and they have all sorts of injuries as well.
Yeah, it
So
could be that
yeah,
because I can't quite
it,
see if there's another scoot missing along
yeah,
the other further up the back.
yeah.
But yeah,
But
we
to me,
usually it was like hundreds, tens, and units sort of thing the way it was recorded.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I didn't know that they did that for
yeah,
research. That's a really interesting story in its own right. Well done, Jenny.
yeah, yeah. Well, there you go. There's another element to the story
Yeah.
that photograph can convey. So that brings me to a very special event. And this is a story about an expedition, and I've alluded to it a little bit already, into the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. And Linda and I were invited to go on a photography expedition into the Great Bear Rainforest in 2017. And it I knew a little bit about the area because I'd read about the bears and some of the wildlife encounters that we were likely to have, including the fact that it was the habitat and the home of the spirit bear, which is a very special bear, said to be one of the rarest bear species on Earth. But we were told that there would be no spirit bears there because it was the wrong time of the year. The salmon weren't running. It's very unlikely that the spirit bears would be down near the water's edge where we could actually see them. The spirit bear is a white bear, and they occur. They're actually a black bear that's white, and they come about through the mating of two parents, both of which carry a recessive gene. And if two bears mate with that recessive gene, the offspring is white. There's said to be between 60 and 100 of those individual white bears in the Great Bear Rainforest. So to be in their proximity was special. It was a special time, and we spent a week there traveling around each day, and we didn't see a spirit bear. I just knew that there was one there waiting for us. I had a very strong feeling that it was there. It wanted to see us and say hello. And we'd been told numerous times that it was the wrong time of the year. It's a waste of time going up there. We won't see one. Linda, as some of you who know her know, is a very persuasive person. And she got onto the guides and said, we need to go up there and have a look. And we did. And that's what was waiting for us.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's a long way from my best photograph, but it to this day remains my most important photograph. And that experience, when we weren't supposed to have it, spoke to me on a very deep level. And it enabled me then to write an article which was published in Outdoor Photographer magazine in America in I think it was 2018. It was published talking about the environment and the bears and the local people whose dedication to conserving this environment for ecotourism. And I was interested in Wong's statements before about the benefits of ecotourism, because that's what the Kitasoo Heiheis people realized as well, is that by protecting their environment and protecting these bears, people would come to see it and they would want to experience the place. And it's worked beautifully for them, and it's very special. It's interesting that when we captured the photos of spirit bears and we went back to the lodge that night, the locals asked us not to publish any metadata in the photos that would give people an idea of exactly where that bear was. And, in a way that's disappointing because you shouldn't have to do that, but it's understandable why they would want to. So that's an example of a series of photos that tell a story for conservation, and the story was words and photographs. Interestingly, on the next page in that article is a double-page spread of a landscape photo that I took with my phone of the marine environment. So, it goes back to my original point. It's not about the camera, it's about what you've got. And I pulled out my phone and did it, and this was with an iPhone 7. It's not even a particularly modern phone, just did a panorama, and I came home and I blew it up to 2 meters wide on canvas. And I sold a couple of versions of that, and it was published in the magazine. So, you know, you can tell visual stories with pretty much anything. The main thing to me is to just get out in the environment with whatever you've got, capture images and tell stories. So that's where I'd like to wrap it up. I hope you've found that interesting and enjoyed some of the images, and happy to take any questions.
That was marvelous. Thank you, David. I love the stories that went along with the images. They're absolutely beautiful to hear. So thank you so much. I'm going to go first to Irene and Taylor because this is your part of the world. What do you want to add?
Nothing, but like I said, like we're very aware of the Great Bear Rainforest, and it's definitely on our bucket list of places to go. And yeah, really cool to see that you went there and took these beautiful photos. So really amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. We went there the following year as well and hardly saw any bears at all. So
Okay.
that's what makes that experience incredibly special.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's got a question for David? While you're thinking, I've got one.
Sorry.
David, I know that, sorry, Nico, do you want to go first?
Sorry, is that for me?
Yes, go for it.
It was really just more a comment. Just the bear with the grass and the look in his eye, and you just can't, that's such a powerful photo. It's just, you just fall in love with that bear. It's magical. Yeah, thank you.
It is, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So David, my question was, you alluded to something that can be a negative about environmental and wildlife photography is giving people the ability to find the animals. I know that we've got the same problem in Queensland with the koalas, in the Queensland koala spotting apps and things are trying really hard not to be specific so that we don't actually harm koalas. So do you think there's a way of actually managing these issues?
I think that's a really good question, and that's something we struggle with a lot. I think it's hard to get people to fall in love with a subject if you don't show them the subject. And whether it's koalas or bears or any other endangered species, the balance between human encroachment on a wild species is always a delicate one. With koalas, they're an iconic species in this country. They're important. Why should people not be permitted to go and see one in the wild? After all, that's what we say we want to do. We want to protect these animals so people can experience them in the wild, not in a zoo. So I think I struggle with it a little bit because there are people who may do the wrong thing. I've heard stories of people finding out where there's koalas and, a whole mass of people go and taking photos and making noise and all that sort of thing, disturbing an animal that's, essentially trying to rest to recuperate its energies because they have such an appalling nutritional source. But then what if someone in that gaggle of people goes off and gets really excited about the need to conserve these animals and donates money or becomes part of a movement, or whatever they choose to do. And so I think we have to trust people to do the right thing. Yes, there's a risk. Um, the major issue with the spirit bears in British Columbia, what they fear is poachers,
Yeah.
because obviously a rare animal like that would be valuable for a poacher, whether it be for its skin or just capturing the animal and taking it. So that's a slightly different deal that we don't face here in this country. But I think the
We
reason
don't.
they were keen for
We
us not.
certainly do in Borneo, don't we, Wong? So you certainly got that problem with wildlife photography in Borneo as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I think uh, where is the balance is always very important, and then understanding the needs and the local situations and things like that. Like say, for example, Sabah, right now there is a small group of peoples that use this very rare pheasants called Borneo peacock pheasants to generate revenues and help the local economy. I think which is good because given the facts that the forest is so vast, given the facts that there's no patrolling or on by law enforcement agencies on the ground, and we cannot stop anybody from entering the forest, but at least we can choose what kind of people are entering the forest. And then if our set of people entering the forest, meaning nature lover, nature tourists, and also birders, we can keep the poachers away and keep the wildlife alive and wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no this group of people, then the local people are so poor, then they have no choice but to poach, set snares, and everything's gone. And then people also ask me, what about mass tourisms? Are you worried about mass tourism? I said, I don't worry about the mass tourism just yet, right now. I worry about no tourism, because if there's no tourism, local people will start hunting, and and then the mass tourism issue come later. I think with this kind of impact from mass tourism in our mind, we can do good management to prevent them from happening or from getting worse. But right now, yeah, I need tourism. I need people, our side of people,
I
to
think one thing that
put food on
David talked
table.
about there, which is a perfect example, is the Queensland whale watching industry, where we used to shoot whales
Exactly.
with
Yeah.
guns and harpoons, and now we shoot them with cameras, and it's allowed them to come back.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, so it's the photography is certainly a positive. It's a much better option than others, isn't it? But it does
Yeah,
come with the caveat.
yeah, yeah. The ultimate,
And when
if
you
the
think about
ultimate
it,
goal, yeah, if the ultimate goals is trying to generate revenues, then we need to find ways, and definitely through nature-based tourism is a good way to seek the balance.
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say, it presents us with an opportunity to tell a story about how to interact with wildlife as well, and we can make that a part of the story when we capture these images and tell a story about how to behave around an animal that needs to
Really
rest,
true.
or a nocturnal animal that needs its eyesight at night, doesn't want to have a spotlight in its face, and these things.
Yeah, well done. So yeah, that storytelling element of it is as important as the picture then.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done. Any other questions for David?
I just had a question. I was wondering what your process was when you were trying to tell a story. Do you take the photo and then extrapolate the story from it, or do you aim have an idea of what story you're telling and then go after that?
That's a really great question, and in theory, uh, I'm well planned. I'm focused on the story that I need, and I go out there and I capture the image and bring it back, and you know edit it all up, and that's great. The reality is not that, but I usually, if I have a story in mind, I go out there with a sense of purpose about the sorts of images that I think I want to capture to tell the story that I want to tell. sometimes something happens and I'll grab an image that tells a different story. And if that's the case, then I'll still tell that story. But as a general rule, as a wildlife photographer, I try and go into a situation with some sense of purpose as to what I want to capture, because that affects what sort of lens I've got or what time of the day I'm out there, or all of those sort of factors go into the planning process. Don't want to go and photograph koalas if I'm trying to find images of them feeding or breeding or doing things in the middle of the day, because they're more likely to be asleep. So do that sort of degree
What
of
you're
planning
alluding to there
first.
is interesting, David, so that before you even start taking images, you're doing a fair amount of research, to plan your images. Yeah, well, that's really important.
Yeah, photographing with purpose.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Good question there, Mara. Any
Thank you.
last questions before we wrap up for the day? Oh, it looks like Taylor, you're reaching here. It looks like you might have a question.
We have a quick question. Do you have a website we can go to look at all your photos, or you must have something?
Yes, I do. It's just simply davidmackenziePhotos.com.
Okay.
And Instagram, I think, is the same thing.
When we send out a link to the videos, we'll also share that so that you can click on that as well. But thank you, David, so much for being here today. I've learned a great deal, and I'm hoping that everyone else has as well. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. Thank you, Wong, for being here and sharing yours, and for everyone else who comes monthly to find out more stuff about wildlife. It's really fun to have you here, and I'm glad that this community is growing. So don't forget, there are a couple of ways we can continue to have it grow. The first one is to actually connect with things like the YouTube channel, so that you can see past speakers and catch up in anything that you've missed. Connect with me on Facebook, Insta, and LinkedIn as well. That's kind of a good way to make sure that you know what's coming up. And make sure that you've actually signed up, or if friends are interested, that they sign up for World of Wildlife newsletter, so that they'll actually know when things are on. Okay, so based on that, please help spread the word. Let's get as many people in this community as we can. This is a free thing. Let's get as many people here as we can and share our knowledge. It's a really good thing to be able to do. I hope to see you next month. We've got a really cracker of a speaker again for you to learn a lot from. I'm not going to tell you who it is, because I'm just working out the time frame, but she's awesome, so I think you'll enjoy that. Thank you very much for all your time, guys, and have a very merry holiday season. We'll see you in January.